Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel, and I'm carrying on with the Casey Anthony trial, and the next witness is Dr. John Schultz. Now I will give a warning because it's going over recovering Kaylee's remains, so if you really don't want to hear about that I suggest you skip this video. So Dr. John Schultz is a professor of anthropology. His speciality is forensic anthropology and archaeology. Anthropology is the study of human skeleton. Archaeology is going out to site and looking for and at bones. So on the 11th of December he received a phone call from Steve Hansen to inform him that there had been skeletal remains found. He was asked if he could help, and they asked if he was able to go to the scene that day to help with the recovery of the remains. He wasn't available for the first initial recovery, so he went directly to the ME's office. He remembers firstly seeing the remains in bags, so when he looked in the bags he saw the skull and duct tape. They go through a couple of photographs of the skull, obviously not on screen for us to see. Again, as with Gary, it was surprising to him that the mandible was still in its anatomical position, because generally there needs to be something there holding it in place. Because as I said, if there's no soft tissue it's just going to fall away. John says the hair that had moved to the base of the skull was holding it in place, so there's a bit of a discrepancy over what was holding it in place, but obviously it was still there. He says there was no evidence of trauma in the bones. He provided assistance to law enforcement for the recovery of the rest of the remains at the Suburban Drive scene. On the 12th of December in the morning, John arrived at the scene and they talked about how to process this type of scene. Obviously with it involving a small child, there was going to be a lot of small bones and they didn't know how far out it could possibly go. Plus this area was dense vegetation and the ground was it was not level, it was covered in thick vines and everything, so it needed coordinating properly. They decided they would process the primary scene, and John instructed them to be on their hands and knees. They needed to be removing leaf litter and they would be double checking all that material, meaning they would be finding the material and taking it to what they had set up of sifting stations, and there was actually 2 sifting stations, so everything was sifted through twice, and they would start at the primary scene and work their way out depending on where they were finding things. John was not at the scene all the time, he was there for an advisory role, so bones would be found and he would be there to inform them if they were human or non-human. They show a picture of the canopy that they put up over the primary scene, and primary scene means that's where the initial bags and skull were found. They would use flags in the ground as and when they were finding skeletal remains so they could map the scene. Then they show a picture of flags being used under the canopy, which is a close-up photo of the first picture, and then they show the CSI at work on the ground. They now show a picture of the spine bones that were found. Obviously they're not showing it on screen, but this bit isn't very nice. Upon finding these, they were all together, so that would have meant they were moved together, attached to each other with soft tissue. Horrible. They were found at a different location to the skull, so they'd been dragged. A bone they are now looking at on screen had been chewed by animals, and there was also grave wax found on these bones. Grave wax, as we know from previous testimonies about decomposition, it's what happens when the body decomposes. It produces all this decompositional fluid, and some of it turns into this waxy stuff which is known as grave wax. They now show a picture of all the skeletal bones in anatomical order after they have been recovered. I have a picture of this and I'm going to show it now, so if you're watching this video and you don't want to see the picture, look away now. Okay, it's generally very difficult to find all of the skeletal remains. They found all teeth except one, most of the spine, many of the ribs, all the long bones. For the most part, there were only a few parts missing, and he says it was a very successful effort. So they now show a picture of a map where all the bones were found, and it's separated into different areas. So they go through each area. So in area A, which is the primary area, they moved south from there, and what was found in area A was the skull, the bags, the arms, hand bones, the lower legs and the left foot. It's just so cold speaking about a dead child in this way. So in area B, the shafts for the upper arm bones. In area F, the trunk of the body with the pelvis and the lower legs, which were more than likely dragged to this area, and other bones were also found here too. They were probably all dragged by animals while still attached to each other. I see this bit is just awful. How anyone could just dump a child and just leave there. Area D, only one bone, that was for the right foot, which exhibited carnivore damage, which was the only bone found for that foot. In area A was only a hand bone. Area G, most of the spinal column with many of the ribs attached. As previously said, there was damage to the pelvis area. Area H, more of the ribs and some other little bones. And area I, they found more of the spine bones and more of the ribs. The separation of the body would have been a natural process. There was no sign of dismemberment beforehand. He thinks it could be possible that the body was out there for 6 months, which matches up with everything else. So the cross-examination and Mr. Mason. So what we get from this, because Mr. Mason likes to go on and he's even way more aggressive than Baez is. He's just rude. The bones were x-rayed. There was no evidence of fractures, no evidence of anything to say that Kaylee had any injuries before her death. The tape was not covering the nose area when the skull was found. And this is, one of the themes that the defence is going down, is because the tape wasn't attached. How do they know that the tape was covering the mouth and nose? So the redirect, the tape was covering the mouth when he saw it. He couldn't say exactly if it would have covered the nose. So, yeah, I knew these bits were coming up. It's not, especially when it's a child, it's just horrific. The death of a child is bad enough, but when she's being dumped and left to rot and animals have done what they've done, it's just inhumane. Okay, so I will be back with more in the next video. Until then, bye for now.